Welcome to another episode of the Straight Up Chicago Investor Podcast. I'm 𝗤𝗃𝗀𝗀, licensed agent with Second City Real Estate. With me, as always, is 𝗪𝘃𝗀𝗃, founder and owner of 𝗤𝘃𝗱𝗰𝗀𝗀. Mark, how are things going over at 𝗤𝘃𝗱𝗱𝗀𝗀?
Not bad, not bad. I am looking to replace myself on the business development side. So anybody listening, I'm putting together the job description and the minimum standards and requirements, all that stuff to be a salesperson for property management services. So if anyone that's in sales or anyone that's a realtor, maybe looking to transfer to something that's W-2, it doesn't necessarily have to, but all day long I get to talk to real estate investors. Some more educated than others, but if you know anybody that might be interested, I will have the official, by the time this comes out, I'll have everything posted, and it's going to be partial salary and then partial commission. So there's a good opportunity to make upwards probably over six figures. So pretty excited about getting that posted and training somebody. So
cool. Congrats.
Yeah, thanks, man. What about yourself? I know you had an event on Monday. How'd that go?
I was at an event. So I was at the 𝗫𝘃𝗶𝗵𝗁 family, or I'm sorry, I'm butchering the name of it, but the John Kasman, Nikki, and RJ event that they have on the Monday over at Chief O'Neill's. But it was awesome. It was the first time I've been in a while. And then it was, you'd love this. It was, someone's talking about Portage Park. I'm like, ooh, obviously my ears perk up talking about Portage Park. And then, Jason Wagner's there talking about his buildings he has over at like Lawrence, Milwaukee. And then there's a guy there who was talking about it. And then there's a girl, I think her name was Chelsea. She's like, oh, I have a 3 unit on Agatite, and like 4 or 5 people like in my little neck of the woods there. So great 20 minutes of my life there. Just talking about awesome. 3 units in the Portage Park neighborhood.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, it was good. It's we, again, just as a reminder to everyone, we have everything on our website. Like, look at all these different events. And if you are a vendor looking to add, we will add you on there as well. There's so many different opportunities to go out there and network. There's no excuse not to be doing it.
Yeah, no, exactly.
That could be a housing provider tip of the week, but go ahead and take us into one.
Well, this housing provider tip this week, I was on the phone yesterday with 𝗤𝘃𝗲𝗀𝗀𝘁 leasing. I've drawn a blank on his company, but he specializes in leasing all around the city. He's got a whole huge leasing team. You worked with him, right, Tom? I think you've worked with him in the past.
I believe so.
But we were talking to him in my conversation with him and our leasing manager. We were talking about how the leasing season has been kind of extended these last couple of years, because when COVID hit, a lot of Chicago landlords, they pushed their normal June, July move out dates to August, September, October. So leasing season, this could be good or bad, but I think the tip here is really just to be aware that the traditional leasing season in Chicago is kind of stretched a little more. Now, that might mean that there's people out looking for places further into the fall. And at the same time, it might mean that you're going to have more competition if you have your place listed in the fall. So just be cognizant of the market, what's going on when your tenant's moving out and you're pre-leasing and so forth. So
one thing to add there, the great advice, like, don't default to a 12-month lease if it's not going to be in your benefit, right?
Oh yeah.
Take them through I've seen that all the time. Like, man, why is this lease going November to November? That's stupid. Like, that goes November to the next March. Like, that it becomes however many months that is, 16 months. Like, get it on a good cycle moving forward.
Yeah, we started that about 4 years ago. So anything that renews or starts September 1st or later, we'll do 14 to 16 month leases, which puts you into late winter, spring. Yeah. So our even for us, everything picks up in February. As long as we're not having anything in that end of the year, I think we're good. But yeah, that's awesome. I'm happy you brought that up, because that's something that's really helped us really just kind of get in a good cycle for the entire company.
All right. Today's guest. Pumped. It's been a while. This is another one where we should have had you on earlier. But he's been with 𝗫𝘃𝗱𝗃𝗃 for 8 years. He has sold over 200 properties, over $650 million in sales. Also an investor himself. We are recording this in July, and he's already sold over $100 million this year alone. I think he might be our first Iowa Hawkeye graduate on the show as well. So without further ado, Joe Smazal, welcome to the show. How you doing, Joe?
Everything's good, guys. Appreciate you having me on.
We're excited. Joe, you said you're a listener, so we're ready for you to answer the last questions and get the Chicago fact right, similar to Jeff Weinberg last week.
I'm sure Jeff set a high bar. But yeah, you guys have put out a lot of good content. I've met some resources through the show. So I appreciate you guys having me on.
Awesome. All right. So most people who know you as the guy who has sold $100 million halfway through a year. You didn't start there, right? So let's talk a little bit about just getting started here. And this can go for investors. This can go for brokers. We all see the highlight. We all see the top of the mountain. But talk us through that first year. One, why did you get into this? And then just give us the oral history of the first 12 months of being a commercial broker.
Sure. I left a stable job that had some growth opportunities that just didn't feel like where I wanted to be. It didn't feel like a career path that I wanted to be at 5 or 10 years down the road. So there was no immediate issue. And it was a good gig. But I thought that I wanted to start my own business, and without knowing anything about real estate, it seemed like a common denominator in some successful people who I admired and liked the lifestyle. So I started to explore different interviews within commercial real estate brokerage. I didn't know anybody in Chicago real estate. I knew very little even about the geography in Chicago at that point. I had been in the city for like 2 years. So I didn't know the neighborhoods. I didn't know the nuances. But I was confident in kind of betting on myself, and real estate felt like a good avenue to do that. This was in 2000. Kind of made the decision probably in like late 2010, beginning of 2011, which wasn't a very popular time to get into real estate. Probably allowed me to ramp up a little faster than somebody starting today. There was a little bit less competition. Some people who I think were towards the end of their careers who weren't all in, I think were kind of weeded out during the downturn. So I ended up interviewing and getting a job with 𝗦𝘁𝗶𝗵𝘁, a big national firm that a lot of people in investment real estate in Chicago are probably familiar with. Got a lot of good friends that are still there and met a lot of great people there. It was a good place to learn. And I made no money for the first 6 months, which, to their credit was, basically what they told you to prepare for. I was really frugal. It meant a lot of sacrifices with lifestyle. My girlfriend then, wife now, is really supportive, and I didn't have kids or a mortgage or anything at that point. So I was working all the time. We moved into a studio that was like a glorified studio. It was like a block from my office. So it was really easy for me to get there early and to stay late. And the first deal was like 6 months in, and I made like $4,500 or something, And so
let's talk about the first deal.
Yeah.
Mark, go ahead and comment here before we jump in.
Well, I just wanted to anybody that doesn't have children yet. you referenced the come, go when you want, work as late as you want. That changes no matter what. No matter your husband, wife, spouse, whatever. That all changes when you start having kids, and you also want to be there too. So do those grinding hours and that putting that time in early on for your younger listeners or your single listeners.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah,
so Joe, we got a whopping $4,500 in our pocket. Like, let's talk through this deal here. How did you finally get someone knocked out? How many no's did you hear before that?
I mean, yeah, I was making thousands of phone calls, and I had a system. So my geographic focus was Jefferson Township. So, which includes, Tom said that he loves to talk about on the northwest side of the city. But it was basically North Avenue, so 1600 on the southern border, to Devon, which is 6400 north, I think, to the north, and then to the east. I'm not sure what the screen to the east is the same. To the east was Western Avenue, 2400 west, and then west of Harlem, 72 or 74. So it's a big area of the city, but a lower it was a lower density market than some of the other north side markets. So it's covering kind of a bigger territory, but for a similar, basically similar kind of stack, for the type of buildings we're calling on. So, I would call through some areas in the morning one day, and then I would try to hit those areas in the afternoon or evenings. And, I had a system for recording my calls and when I would, or recording, like taking notes, not recording what I'm talking. And, when to leave a voicemail, when not to leave a voicemail, what I said, I was pretty systematic with it. The first deal I talked about recently on a buddy of mine started a podcast called the Rise and Invest podcast. I talked about the first deal was a 9-unit building in 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗃, kind of the border of 𝗬𝘃𝗃𝗃, Portage Park. It was a deal that was expired. It was expired by somebody else. It was an older Polish couple. It was, awesome, like great people. And I ended up selling it to a guy that I've done like 25 deals with, 12 years later. I was thinking I might be able to answer the question with my first like bigger deal, which was my third overall deal. Is that fair?
Let's go for it. Let's hear it.
Okay. All right. So I was calling probably on the 5518 West Barry, which is the first deal I sold. And there was a guy in the market. It was a long-term owner of 3 buildings. There were 2 really nice courtyards and 1 nice 12-unit walk-up building. And I was he had given me like a hint that he was thinking about selling. So once I kind of get like a taste, I'm very good at the follow-up. I'm very persistent with that. I don't like to just like bang my head against the phone and not listen to what the other person is saying. But if they've indicated that there's some desire to sell, I'm very good at following up. So that was the case here. I called him a million times. He was like a do-it-yourself guy driving around in the pickup truck and was always at the building. So I finally pinned him down on when he was going to be at his smallest building, which was a 12-unit building. And Marcus and Millchap was, I don't know if it's still the policy, but they were very like strict about wearing a suit and tie, or a shirt and tie at least every day. It was like middle of summer. I meet him in the boiler room. We're sitting on paint cans, in my like Joseph A. Banks suit. He's like absolutely chain smoking cigarettes, leaning against the boiler, talking to me. And the meeting goes well. He is interested in my opinion of value. He rattles off the rent roll by memory, like with dates and everything, and gives me the expenses, which are rounded to the 100, which are just not precise. So you take them with a grain of salt. I turn around an opinion of value in like a day because I knew that market inside and out, even though I wasn't working in it for that long. So I turn it around quick. He was cool with it. He was cool with the value, made a really quick decision to hire me. And, this is 2011. And it was just a totally different dynamic in the marketplace. I mean, it was like, the easier part of the equation was getting the inventory, whereas now it's really tough to get the inventory, but there's always pretty reliable buyer demand in what I sell. At that point, it was like making, there we go, just making 1,000 more calls to try to get people just in the door for a deal that was like, I don't know, 70,000 a unit, maybe 71,000 a unit, which is, it's easily double that now. So he saw the hustle really quick, and he was interested in the opinion for the 2 courtyard buildings, which made a 66-unit portfolio. And so we listed those, and then that was like a totally different level of credibility for me calling in the market, as opposed to having 9-unit buildings and 12-unit buildings with 66 units. And that economies of scale allowed me to call with that deal in other markets kind of throughout the north side of the city and really gain more credibility. So at the risk of like getting real long-winded, it was pretty well received. We got an offer that was pretty good, and he didn't immediately take it. And then one night, on a Friday night, he called me at like 7 or 7:30, and he's like, "All right, I'll do it." And I told my wife, I'm like, "I got to drive up there. Like, I don't want to miss the opportunity. Like, I don't want to wait till tomorrow. He's been noodling on this, and I don't know how long the guy's going to be around. The market sucks. I'm driving up there." And so I drove up there. I got there like 8:30. He lives an hour and a half away. And he's in his front yard with his shirt off, his dog's running around, and he signed the contract on the hood of my old Jeep, and his dog's like freaking jumping up on me. And I think that was a really long answer, so I'll save you it was a mess. It turned out to be more of a mess of a deal than I even thought at that point, but it closed, and it's a $4 million deal that put a couple bucks in my pocket, gave me the cushion, gave me the confidence, and was kind of off to the races then.
That's awesome. So, Joe, do you have like just a rough idea? Like, are you talking thousands of phone calls before this happens?
Well, so the standard was to make 50 calls a day, or like the target was to make 50 like new calls a day, talk to 10 or 12 new people, like have a constructive conversation with 10 or 12 new people, and set and go on one meeting a day. It was kind of like the goal. So, yeah, yeah, thousands of calls.
That's the grind no one talks about. So,
no,
right, so,
I mean, like when you start, I mean, sorry, Tom, it's like when you start, you're missing vacations, you're making less money than your friends, and like it just, you know, you're overworked and underpaid. And in real estate specifically, like, you know, the shows are glamorized. Like if you go on social media or LinkedIn or whatever, you know, you see, you know, I'm guilty of it too. Like self-promotion is a part of the business. So I'm posting that I sold $100 million in real estate this year because that's how I advertise my services. But like for somebody starting out, they need to know the story to it too. Otherwise it's just like, it's false hope, or it's not the whole picture. So, I think like you said at the beginning of the question, goes for everybody, like whether you're an investor or you're a broker, or you work within the real estate as a vendor. I mean, you have to, it becomes who you know, and it becomes who your network, which can compound as you do it and get a lot easier. But when you start, especially if you don't really have a head start, it's a grind.
Yeah, for realtors, just your average realtor, they say 50% of what you do, you ultimately never get paid for. And when you're a new broker, I think it's probably closer to that 80%. You literally spend 80% of your time just trying to figure out what you need to do to make money. So, but then ultimately, yeah, it does. You're right. It comes down to your network, and you don't have, a lot of people are like, I don't have a big enough network, but you have to create that network, and that's part of that grind up front.
And there's a lot of, there's a lot of attrition in real estate brokerage, whether it's commercial or residential, I think. I mean, I see the commercial side firsthand. And some of it's avoidable. You know, like if I have somebody that's talking to me, whether I know them or it's my best friend that's talking to me about being interested in real estate, like I think the first part of it is just really, really vetting it on the front end to being confident this is what you want to do for the long haul. Because I've seen a lot of people who are smart, personable people who were looking at it more as like a stepping stone to something else, or as like, if they're kind of in limbo and what they want to do in a career path. Like if you're going to be successful, you're going to really have to work at it. I just don't think that it fills like a void in a career path unless it's really what you want to do for the long term. So when people ask me about it, I try to encourage them to really vet it, probably to an extreme on the front end, and not get like kind of enchanted by the goal of, 5 or 10 years down the road.
Well, I think a lot of people that want to get into it, I think there's such a learning curve because most brokerages, there is limited structure. What you laid out for 𝗫𝗃𝗵𝗁, even on the commercial or office or industrial side, there's structure there, but it's still a huge learning curve. How to talk to somebody is not something they could learn in a book. They have to literally spend X amount of hours standing with the guy that's in your office, understanding how the flow of that conversation should go, who should be the expert in certain moments and who shouldn't be. And I think that ultimately is a time period that a lot of people don't make it through, to what you're saying.
The learning curve, like, I don't know if it's just like a mental, I looked at it as kind of like a graduate school program almost, for the first year. Cause I'm like, I'm starting a new job, which I really want to be like a business within a business. But it was like, I knew that there was going to be this time where I had to learn a ton and I wasn't going to make much money. So I kind of looked at it, just as like a mental trick. Like, this is just paying your dues. Like, this is just the like graduate school type, like segue into getting into real estate. So it helped me. I don't, but I think that you have to be eyes wide open about the ramp up period, and you have to be just prepared personally and financially to be able to make it through, because there's a lot of attrition just in that stage.
There's such a, I know I was guilty of this, there's a period when you first, whether you first get licensed or first start actually moving deals, where you're more of a gopher for clients than you are the expert. And there's a transformation. And sometimes it doesn't happen to 5-6 years later when you actually start getting burned by things and you start really standing up to your clients saying, listen, man, you can't make that decision because of blank, blank, and blank. And it's that's even longer learning curve to actually truly become the expert in the conversation.
Did you, for a while, I was like embarrassed about, I don't know if it was embarrassed is the right word, but self-conscious about not knowing everything at the beginning. And then, something like clicked where I just, I'm an honest guy. Like I was honest with people, but I felt like I had to talk myself out of answers or around like answers sometimes. And I was just like, I'm sorry. I used it almost like as an advantage. Like, I'm newer to this. What I don't know, I make up for and hustle. And, I'll definitely find out of that answer. I don't want to tell you the wrong thing. But like, I think showing the sincerity in the answer and that you're going to work really hard. Like, I knew when I met those people, the first building I sold or, the 10th building I sold or whatever, like I didn't know as much as all my competitors, but I was really confident and I did outwork anybody in the market, period. And that's what I knew I could promise somebody. So I knew I would make more calls, and anything that I didn't know, I'd go to my mentor, I'd go to my manager, and get answered appropriately to make sure that it's handled the right way. But I think when I flipped the switch on that and stopped worrying about not being able to know everything and started just embracing kind of where I was in my career at that point, it was received a lot better by clients.
I think there's such an advantage today of what's out there on the internet. I mean, I think there's two learning curves. I think there's, when you're a real estate agent, I think there's the understanding the actual numbers. When we were talking about investment property specifically, understanding the investment, understanding the jargon, the FAR, like all those crazy things that they definitely don't teach you through the IDFPR courses. There's that part. That now there's a lot more out there. For me, I remember just sitting on LoopNet for hours on end, just looking at deals and understanding what things meant. And then there's the other part of just the transaction flow. What's normal, what's right, when's the attorney overstepping themselves, or when is attorney suck and not doing their job? When's the lender dragging ass? Like, I think those two directions are the two areas that you really can, if we're going to break down the whole expert part, and it takes years to learn both those. Some do it faster than others on one or the other, and that usually offsets the weakness on the other side.
I totally agree. And sometimes I think like what you just described is an advantage in today's market, where like you have access to pretty much everything like online. But sometimes like when you started, it might have been, you were probably able to outwork somebody and like absorb the knowledge faster than other people who might have been able to fake it a little bit more in today's world where everything is so Googleable.
Well, the crazy thing now is it's totally flipped. So for me, so I got my license in 2003 and the whole before the crash and before, all the Redfins of the world, all that stuff. So I truly like would find properties for clients. You're at LoopNet or CoStar, or there's a couple other amateur ones back then, but you had to find the property for the clients. And then once it went under contract, you kind of wiped your hands and everything kind of just happened at that point. Now it's like that stuff's usually out there and there's some cold calling and stuff like that. But now it's getting it from the offer to the closing table is truly where the brokers earn their money, I think. So that's been a huge shift in the last 2 decades of just our industry as a whole.
The biggest thing that comes to mind, on that is when I started, and this is 11 or 12 years ago, whatever. It was like building your database was very manual. Like it was, it was like, I mean, talking about my supportive wife, like to the point where like when we were spending time together, she would come with me to like drive around the northwest side of the city on the weekends or in the evening or whatever, like to take pictures of buildings and take pictures of signs and take pictures of dumpsters because they have, the management sign on it. And, I had an online catalog of, that I took notes that, this building looks shabby. This is in really good shape. Sometimes you see the guy around, gal, introduce yourself, whatever. And now it's all on CoStar and everybody's phone numbers there, and email addresses there, pictures of buildings there, last time it sold, mortgage information, and the guys that were 10 years before me were like, oh, you have it easy because, here's my catalog of like Polaroid pictures with the, notes on the back. So the market's definitely evolved, and like, information gets easier or, but again, I'm kind of happy that I had to do all that because I don't think anybody else is driving around with their girlfriend, like taking pictures of signs on buildings on the weekend.
Yeah, no, for sure. You do have that advantage. I was cleaning out something in the office a couple of weeks ago and I found ACT. It used to be a CRM, ACT. And that was what I had to carry around to download it to the different computers that I wanted to use it on. And then I had to hope the data transferred every time, or otherwise I had to go to one of my backup CDs that I had it on to upload it. So definitely my new CRM now, that whoever takes that sales position that is going to replace me, they have a much better CRM.
I was going to say, you're not selling the position really well here, dude.
No. We got, I fixed those bricks.
So Joe, we started having some success here. Like, those two courtyard buildings lead into, all right, we're starting to get a flow here. Let's talk about, like, did you start having a focus on certain areas, right? Like at some point you get to a position where it's like, all right, this is my bread and butter, and whether it be building type, location. How did that evolve? And what is that for you? Like, what is the Joe Smazal special?
Yeah. So it started with a tighter, I mentioned Jefferson Park being, obviously a pretty broad area, but it started with that as a really, really laser focus, that area. Like when it's probably gonna be a little bit of a tangent, but
go for
it. When
I
sold the 66 unit building or portfolio, it gave me credibility with a guy who had 135 unit portfolio of 6 buildings, same market, Portage Park. And he was in Arizona and I was hammering him, and he's like, all right, I'm coming to town. Meet me on Saturday at like Hilton or Marriott or whatever out by O'Hare. And so I was just like, I was so stoked. There's so many calls. It's got, it's a big portfolio. And I get out there and I brought a guy who was like mentoring me at the time. And there was like a comic book or like a Pokemon type convention, and everybody was dressed up. It was a scene like I'm like swarming the lobby. So they're like, I don't know what exactly they were there for, but everybody was dressed up, and I'm like, and I call him, I'm like, where are you? He's like, I'm by the elevator. And I'm like, I said to my mentor, Jamie, I'm like, I didn't take this guy for somebody like who'd be into this stuff, but he says he's like right around here somewhere. And we looked for him for like half an hour, and it was just a shit show. And it was just like hectic in there. And call him back. I'm like, Mike, I don't see you anywhere, man. And he's like, I'm by the elevators. I'm like, at the I forget the specific hotel, Marriott, Hilton, whatever. He's like, yeah, we figure out that there's two Hiltons or Marriotts out by O'Hare, and he's at the other one. So we show up, and it's like we're a half an hour late to the meeting now. We were like half an hour early. We're half an hour late to the meeting, and he's literally taking a nap at the bottom of the elevator. So I don't know why I brought that up, but it was it reminded me because the 66 unit portfolio led to a portfolio that I ultimately sold. That was 135 units. It was about twice the size, and the 135 units, just the way the 66 unit deal provided me, some legs. They say like deals have babies, or, there's a compounding effect to the activity. It was the same case. So, it kind of opened up a broader area for me to call in. And I think a mistake that too many people make at the beginning is kind of chasing deals as opposed to having a focus and a niche. I mean, Chicago is a big market, and there's a lot of really good people who are in real estate in Chicago, really smart. and really active. So I very much believe in having a niche and sticking to it. And that means sometimes bringing in somebody on a deal and, it looks like a delusion of fee that, means a lot of money, but it also provides the ability to stay focused on what my focus is at that time. And my focus is still selling middle market size apartment buildings in Chicago. A huge percentage of my business is in the city, probably 85-ish, 80% of it, something like that. It's on the north side of the city. To call it, $40 million buildings, which ends up being, 10 to a couple hundred units generally. And then the remaining part of my business is in and around Hyde Park, which ends up having kind of similar pricing metrics, similar drivers as some of the north side markets. So I have, that's what I've been doing for the last 12 years and sticking to it.
Yeah, just a quick comment on that. I think even if you can't figure out what your niche is, it's just keeping yourself within geographic boundaries. I know I would run up to Gurney for a condo sale for the same thing I would go to 𝗤𝘵 for a 10,000 square foot lease on an industrial building. So two different dollar amounts, and just kind of keep yourself grounded on 6 counties, choose 3 of them and find people to refer in the other one to make $100 that way. Like that's the other strategy that I took up with trying to cover the whole 6 counties, but yet not be able to service it, but still make $100.
Yeah. So Joe, we're into this, call it the bigger space now. We're established. You talked about bringing in other people. How have things changed now? Meaning, how is it easier for you, right? I'm assuming like you still got to grind. I don't want to take anything away from you, but I'm assuming you don't have to make thousands of phone calls to get that next deal. Like you said, deals have babies. Talk about that amplifying effect, right? Like just how life is it's still hard. I don't want to take anything away, but it's got to be on a different level than it was 10 years ago for you.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing about it is you just get to know people. At this point, I really, throughout my career, but, after doing it for 12 years very actively, I feel like I have really good relationships with a big network in Chicago. If you are active in Chicago multifamily, I try to know you, and I have a good reputation in the market and a good track record. So there's a compounding effect to the activity. But then the other side of it is, and there's I have some name recognition. I have a track record now, and I am much more of an expert, so I can, talk the talk better than I used to, or walk the walk, whatever, you know what I mean? But I think the biggest thing is the compounding effect of the network and the relationships that breeds, because when I bring a deal out now, I kind of can go to a definable list of buyers and create a marketplace for it pretty quickly, as opposed to like recreating the wheel every time I have a new deal. And there's new people that come and go from the market, and it's my job to stay in touch with that. But it does get easier for sure. I mean, I think the hard part about it is that, I still feel like you're as good as your next deal, and it's tiring sometimes because it is a grind still. It's a grind kind of in different ways, but I feel like if I sleep at the wheel, somebody's going to pass me. Like there's a lot of good competitors that know what they're doing, and so I feel a constant kind of itch to continue being active.
Awesome. So Joe, we want to talk about all these different north side neighborhoods. Due to time, I just want to break down a few. We haven't talked about Lakeview all that much. And to most investors, they hear Lakeview and they think, oh, that's too much price per door. That's, out of state money, just parking money somewhere. There's no way to actually make those numbers work. What do you say to those comments?
It's mostly not out of state money is the first thing. I mean, a huge percentage of the deals that sell in Lakeview are sold to local owner operators or local investors with management companies. But yeah, it's mostly it's a local market. I mean, it it is expensive relative to other markets of the city, but to each their own. In what I sell in Lakeview, middle market space, the challenge in creating more velocity is the scarcity of inventory because of typically long hold periods. Lakeview is a really strong rental market, really diverse rental market, a lot of smaller walk-up buildings, kind of mid-market size buildings like what I sell. There's some like vintage high-rise stock, some of that's condo though too. And then, there's some Class A fully amenitized, so it kind of runs the gamut of housing stock. But as a percentage of the overall stock, the new stuff really, it doesn't move the needle much, and there's been a lot of demand historically in Lakeview. It's gotten cooler around Wrigleyville. But because of that scarcity of inventory, when I have something to sell that's a decent size, in my $2 to $40 million range, typically a captive audience of buyers for it. And that means folks that are, sometimes looking at them either globally or as a generational hold, or at least are willing to pay up for the quality of the asset and the quality of, knowing, or the I guess, confidence in knowing that you're going to have a strong rental market for it going forward. So it might not meet everybody's return thresholds in the near term, but it's no surprise to me why people pay the prices that they do in Lakeview.
Got it. When I'm evaluating properties in that area, one of the things that I struggle with is, things that they're vintage, but they were updated, 1995 or whatever, right? And you're not going to get that at a completely vintage or distressed pricing. Like there is some value there, and that throws off my numbers for wanting to, come in and just knock everything out and have fun with it. So like, how do you see people succeed in those situations when there's been some sort of rehab done to it? It's not distressed. It's not turnkey. It's in that weird, like where it's hard to do that value add play based on what they've done to the property already, but it's truly not top of the line, right? Like it's a tough question. I'm probably not articulating it very smoothly.
No, I think I get it. I mean, the 9 times out of 10, the answer to that question is the buyer pool for that is comfortable operating it pretty similar to how it's running. And that's not for everybody. Some people like to operate only a certain level of finish, or only a certain, rehab quality, or only with laundry unit, or only individual HVAC. But the buyers generally, if it's kind of a workable condition, but not necessarily to today's standards, are typically going to beat somebody on pricing who's looking at it as kind of a blank slate. And the exception to that, the 1 out of 10 is instances where somebody has a really aggressive or unique or creative, like value add plan, duplexing down, using unused zoning capacity, building on an adjacent lot. The ADU ordinance has created some opportunities where people have been able to unlock some value in otherwise, kind of undervalued spaces or unutilized spaces. So generally, Tom, it's like somebody saying, I don't need it to be today's finishes. I'm fine operating stuff that's 25 years old. I know that there's demand for it. I'm going to put my professional spin on it, or I'm going to put my management in place, or I'm going to roll this into the fold. I'm going to roll this 40 unit building into the fold with another, 2,000 units that are just like it. So that's generally the buyer profile for those types of deals, in my experience.
Awesome. Great answer there. Mark, anything else to add?
I was listening to one of our earlier episodes, and we did all the boundaries for a couple of early neighborhoods. Can you just break down specific layout where at Lakeview is? Because I know whether you're buying or selling, that differs.
Yeah. Well, I'm a neighborhood. I hate it when people fudge neighborhoods. I'm a neighborhood purist. So if you see one of my books and you think that I was too generous on, like West Bucktown or, something like that, please call me on it. But,
you're telling me the river's not West Lakeview?
It's a city of neighborhoods, and I feel like nobody, most of them, there's a little subjectivity to some of them. So sometimes you look at it, you're like, all right, depending on what map you look at, sure. Okay. But generally they're pretty definable. So Lakeview is, the southern border is 𝗤𝗏𝗏𝗶𝗵𝗁. eastern borders the lake, and then north to Irving Park. North of Irving Park, there's a little pocket called 𝗬𝗏𝗶𝗵𝗁 that kind of straddles it, that hugs the lake as well. West, is going to sound a little, I don't know if this is like kind of corny coming out of the guy who just talked about how he's a purist, but west there is kind of most people, okay, so you say Ravenswood or you could say the tracks, it's 1800 west. Some people say 1600 west, but I like one of my favorite pockets of Lakeview is that pocket between Ashland and Ravenswood where Lincoln Avenue comes up. I think you've got a great stretch of Lincoln there. You can still get to the Southport Corridor stuff. There's good housing stock. There's cool amenities. The Brown Line's right there. Brown Line's a great train. So 1800 to the west. Some people then go a little further and bring in like the Roscoe Village, St. Ben's, North Center type markets and consider that all part of Greater Lakeview. But that's the general area.
Got it. So yeah, would you I guess where would you say North Center is then if you're going to go that far? Because in my head, that's like the tracks are like the dividing point going.
Yeah,
east-west.
I think actually that I could look it up, but that'd be cheating. I think the Chicago neighborhood, like City of Chicago neighborhood map, I think includes some of North Center in like Lakeview. I think it might all be called Lakeview, but North Center I look at as Irving Park to like Roscoe or Addison. Well, I guess Addison, and then Western Avenue to the west. But then, I guess maybe you call some of that around Western and Irving North Center too. And then going east to the tracks or Ravenswood Avenue.
Cool. We got very Chicago there. Someone just listening, out-of-state investor. Breaking down my neighborhood here. Breaking down my block.
You know what? One of my favorite parts of being in real estate, I grew up in Iowa, so I went to Iowa and I grew up in Iowa, and like I love knowing the city. I don't know. I feel like I know just about every street in my markets, and I know like what 100 block it is, and I know the coffee shops to go to. I think it's one of the funnest parts about working in real estate in Chicago is the attachment that it gives you to the city, because you take a lot of pride, I think, in the city and the cool things about it, and then you figure out a way to kind of put up with some of the bullshit too. But yeah, I think it's one of the best ways. I think it's one of the coolest things about real estate is getting to know the city.
Well, that's awesome. Mark, anything else? Or is that a good one to wrap on?
It's a good one to wrap on. Good response.
Let's do it.
All right. I think you prepared for these. So we're expecting stellar replies. So as a broker, what's your competitive advantage? How have you been able to hit the volume that you've hit while others just wish they could?
It's redundant to what we talked about earlier, but my relationships within the network and the market that I work, I think are second to none. And I've got a good reputation for putting clients' interests ahead of mine. And I've been active in doing it for 10 or so years, which has helped a lot.
What is one piece of advice you would tell someone that is yet to buy their first property here in Chicago?
I forgot about this one. Tom called me earlier. He's like, "Are you nervous?" I was like, "I don't know, not really, but I do have answers to the questions that you ask all the time." And I did not go back and cheat and listen to them. I thought I knew them all, and I forgot to write that one down. So this one is winged. I would say build out. This might be redundant to an answer somebody's given in the past, but kind of build out your resource list or your vendor list or your team before you need them, because I think you're going to have to rely on your attorney and your lender options and your inspector and your management company and your leasing team. Get to know those type of people, see what they look for, and how to kind of make their lives easier once you get started. So I think getting to know as many people as you can that you're going to need to rely on before you need them will help you a lot. Because if you're scrambling for a management company, called 𝗖𝗵𝗶𝗵𝗵, but if you need an inspector or something, like, know them before you need them, I guess. So try to build out that team.
Awesome. What neighborhood do you live in? You live in the city?
Yeah, we're in Lincoln Park.
All right.
Yeah.
What do you do for fun?
lot of family time. I've got my wife and I have 2 young boys who are a riot, but definitely keep us busy. Try to go to Long Beach, Indiana as much as we can, especially when it's nice out. And then I like to play golf. Sometimes I think I'm like right on the verge of being like almost good, and then most of the time I'm just freaking trash, and I wonder why I play.
So all the things you do for fun are a very cliche commercial broker. Like you
totally, yeah. Real original, bro. You hang out with your kids, and you. My buddies. I know this is a tangent. You can cut this out if you want, but like my friends are. We have a very critical relationship with each other, I guess. And so he's like, I was putting it on my Instagram for a while, like the stuff I'd put on LinkedIn, and it just wasn't worth hearing about it. Every time I post,
you can make much more money, but it wasn't worth the group of friends.
Yeah, we're all so impressed, and so like whenever I would say, if I would have said something like that to them, Mark, they'd say that's a very CRE broker answer of you.
That's
they
awesome.
do that with me too with the industrial stuff. T3 lighting. Oh, Mark, tell us about T3 lighting in your warehouse.
Yeah.
Joe, what is a good book, podcast, or self-development activity that you'd recommend to our listeners?
So my buddy Drew Brenneman started a podcast recently called the Rise and Invest podcast, which I think is off to a real good start. And then I like a podcast too from a guy named Peter Vonder A, and I don't know, but it's called Behind the Bricks. He's New York based. He's a multifamily broker, but even though it's not Chicago specific, I mean, it's quite the opposite. It's New York specific, but it's a big complex market. And I think it's just an interesting podcast. And from afar, I have a lot of respect for that guy's business. So I think that's a good one too, that you kind of pull some bits and pieces that are actually relevant, but if nothing else, it's an interesting one.
It's a better name than us too. Behind the Bricks. Better name.
Behind the Bricks.
Yeah. Yeah, but you're not sure.
I think it's
pointing or it's not.
Yeah, it's true.
So I guess you could be investing in Bitcoin as a straight up Chicago investor too, I guess. So maybe we're not clear either. All right, cool. Besides yourself, name one person in your local network you'd highly recommend to other investors as a quality resource.
Yeah, I'm working with a guy right now named 𝗦𝘃𝗲𝘀𝗁, who's a really good guy, but I'm working with him, so it's kind of like half recommending myself. So I'll go with 2 other Intera guys who are kind of on the earlier end of their careers, Sam Gutierrez and Max Grossman. They work on the southwest and like southwest sides of the city, but I wanted to recommend them because I see them in here in the office, like putting in the work and putting in the right type of work. And I think anybody in your network that's active in those areas would find them to be a good resource for inventory. And I see them in here working hard every day.
Awesome. We will link to both of them in the show notes here. So, Joe, thank you so much. You have provided a ton of value to our listeners. How can they learn more about you? Is there any way they can provide value to you?
My job is to add value to other people's acquisitions, dispositions, or when I can, ownership. So I guess introducing me to any friends that are, active in multifamily real estate in Chicago, and I'll do my best to be a good resource for them, whatever that means. I'm very easy to get in touch with. In this to do it for the long haul. So I guess expanding my network would be helpful from the listeners, but otherwise be good to get to know them anyway.
Good stuff. All right. And as you were talking, Mark started pacing back and forth, getting ready for his Chicago fact. See him just getting amped up over there for kickoff. All right. So
where is the western boundary of Lakeview?
Yeah. TBD. All right. So we mentioned that our guest today is an Iowa Hawkeye. So I wanted to incorporate Iowa in some way, and I found a way.
Susan, this one goes out to Susan Calamari. I might pronounce that wrong, but she's got a 3 flat in Tri-Taylor. So,
all right,
Susan, if I get this right, then you get a gift card brought to you by Renovo.
So Mark, Iowa Street, it's actually an east-west running street. It stretches across several neighborhoods. So again, it's an east-west street. It's a side street. It's nestled between these two major corridors. I'll give you multiple choice. Fullerton and Armitage, North and Division, Augusta and Chicago, Fulton and Washington.
Give me one more. Yeah, give me those one more time.
Fullerton and Armitage, North and Division, Augusta and Chicago, Fulton and Washington. But the answers are going north to south.
Yeah, I would say North and Division.
Joe, do you want to take a crack as well?
Yeah, I'd go Chicago to Division.
Hold on, you're cheating. You're getting 8 blocks there.
Well, what did you? All right, it's between Chicago and Augusta. Okay,
that is correct. Chicago and Augusta.
Yeah.
So, Susie, Joe got it. We'll it's Renovo's money. I don't care. We'll give her a T-shirt. Give her a gift card.
All right, Susan. All right, Susan, you can thank Renovo for that one. So, wait, confirm the answer though. What was the answer? It was North
Augusta and Chicago.
Augusta, Chicago. Okay,
yeah, it's like 900.
right.
That's like the best.
It runs like Ukrainian village, and then I actually knew it in Oak Park. I had a friend who went to Fenwick. Like it goes past the city there. It keeps going west of Austin Avenue.
I thought the question when you started talking about Iowa, I thought it was going to be about the grilled cheese vendor outside the Union back in the day.
Yeah, I was going to do that.
You know what I'm talking about. You know what I'm talking about.
You know what I figured? We did the Quad Cities with Blake already one time because he's a Quad City guy. So
yeah, no,
that was my go-to.
So, all right, awesome. Thanks, Joe, for coming on. Tom, thank you as always. Listeners, smash that like button. And what we need you to do is refer us to your friend. Leave us a review, whether on iTunes or Amazon or wherever you're getting this podcast downloaded from. Please leave us 5 stars. Joe, thank you. Tom, thank you. And listeners, we will see you next week.
Thanks all.
Thanks, guys.